Those who forget the past are doomed to retake their history exams. Hey there, folks. I suppose I could add this in to my playlist on toxic fandom. It's going to be a little bit less specific than some of the stuff I've done about that topic in general, though I'll get into a few specifics here and there. But I put out a tweet positing that the true answer to who Mrs. Flood will be doesn't matter, because no matter who it is, 60% of the fandom is going to be really angry about it. That tweet for me did decent numbers. Had a number of responses, a few people saying 60% seems low. And then one person who asked pretty sincerely, has it always been this bad? It being the fandom. Has geeky fandom always been this bad? Been this toxic? That's kind of a complicated question to address, but I'm going to try. The short version is sort of. And a big part of the reason why that answer is sort of is it depends on what you count as the fandom. And it depends on what you consider to be fans. Now, when I say that, I'm not talking about some kind of gatekeeping nonsense where like you don't count as a real fan if you haven't seen all this or read all this, or if you don't know this, if you haven't memorized that, you're not a real fan. If this one isn't your favorite, you're not a real fan. You're a fake fan. I'm not talking about any of that nonsense. Here, the reason that I make a distinction I almost never make, because my general rule of thumb is if you like something, you're a fan. So the idea of real fans versus fake fans, or like if somebody actually likes a thing, they're a fan of it, period. But that's the thing. You have to like it. And so when I say it depends on what you count as a fan, here's what I mean on this. You take something that is geeky and in the zeitgeist, and there's going to be a whole bunch of rage merchants, especially on a platform like YouTube, going off about it left and right. How many of them are actually fans of the property? Sure, a lot of them say they are, but let's take Doctor Who for a second. There's plenty of channels out there who are happy to decry it as woke garbage for a variety of reasons. But if you actually look into a lot of those channels, most of them, not all of them, but most of them never talked about Doctor Who until they started beating it with their culture war shillelagh. Up until the point where they could fit it as part of their narrative of woke culture ruining entertainment, they didn't care about it. They didn't watch it. They weren't fans. They only cared about it once it became something that they could fit into their narrative and push their beliefs. Those, I would say, are not fans. Now, not all of them claim to be. Many of them will simply say that they are voicing the voice of fans and then claim that the toxicity that they spew is what real fans think. And yeah, sure. But my point being, within the Doctor Who fandom, there's a handful, I can think of at least one off the top of my head, of really toxic and just nasty channels that demonstrably were around before going specifically into anti-woke narratives and whatnot, and have just leaned that way over time, but were clearly fans of the show before. There are a couple, and again, I can think of at least one, which I'm not going to name because I don't feel like sending even curious hate viewers over to channels like this. But you look at something like Star Wars, and that gets a lot harder to parse because Star Wars being a far more ubiquitous piece of culture, a lot more people have taken it in. Doctor Who, as, you know, globally beloved as it is still pretty niche in the world of pop culture, especially if you're going to compare it to something like Star Wars. By this point in time, a pretty good chunk of the populace has heard of Doctor Who. That same pretty good chunk of the populace has actually seen at least one Star Wars movie and may or may not have liked it, but the spread isn't even close. And from my viewpoint, a much higher percentage of the hate merchants within the Star Wars community are hard to dismiss as just not having been fans before. They probably were. You could argue about whether or not they understood the thing before they decided to decry new entries as woke, and that's a different conversation, which is not what I'm having right now. But it's a lot harder to gate them off and just say, well, those people aren't even fans. So that's the first thing. And it's also one of the reasons why, to be honest, I think that as bad as things can get in both Star Wars and Doctor Who fandom, Star Wars is worse right now because a higher percentage of the vitriol is homegrown from within the fandom, whereas in Doctor Who, while there is some that is from within the fandom, a lot of it is imposed from without by rage merchants who just really, really, really want to just push this narrative of everything is woke and woke is bad and diversity is bad and queer people are bad. They seem like real fun people, real pleasant at parties, I'm sure. But if we set the rage merchants aside, in both cases for the time being, let's set them aside. Let's, even with Star Wars, let's disregard for the moment the fact that there's probably a higher percentage of the rage merchants who you could actually consider to have been fans of the thing before all of this really got completely out of hand. Let's deal with the heart of the question. Has fandom always been this bad? Yeah, kinda. And I've been one of those people who's very quick to point that out because, well, I'm on the older side. Now, not like old, I'm 42, but like as far as, growing up online, I'm from the oldest end of the spectrum where having the internet was something that I grew up with, not from a young age, but I had the internet starting in 6th grade. So it was something I very much grew up with, and I'm on the older end of that spectrum. And I have some experiences that are definitely pre-internet. Most of my life is post-internet. But being on the older edge of that spectrum, of growing up with it as opposed to adopting it, because like there's certainly people who are in this mix that are even older than I am. But from the position of where I sit, I've always been quick to remind people that fans have always been capable of being terrible. The actual nature and behavior of fans, I don't actually think has changed very much. I think what has changed is how they're able to engage with and channel the feelings that fandom has pretty much always grappled with. You can look into hateful letter writing campaigns back in the day. You can read about more than a few comic book storylines that resulted in hate mail and death threats to the comic writers who wrote those stories. That was a thing that happened and has happened for almost as long as there have been dedicated comic book fans. But the major difference on that, kind of the major limiting factor, is that you had to actually sit down and write or type out a letter, stick it in an envelope, find out the correct mailing address to send it to. You had to put your own address as the return address, or at least a P.O. box. So you had to do something to identify yourself in some way, stick a stamp on it, and put it in the mail. It was actual work. Now, it was a work that some people were more than happy to do, and to do so while sending stuff that shouldn't have been said then, shouldn't be said now. But there was a barrier of work. There was a minimum amount of effort you had to put into it. Now, in the age of social media, it's so much easier. Social media has driven a lot of the behavior, and I don't think it's actually tangibly made fan behavior all that much worse. What it's made it is a lot easier to act on. Again, for comparison, I can think back to when I was in grade school, and I would see kids who liked the Star Wars movies bullying younger kids, like, grade school age younger kids, for liking the Ewoks cartoon. Fans can and have always been jerks, or at least some of them have been. But there's two things that social media has done. One I've already kind of alluded to. It's made being a jerk fan a lot easier to do. Rather than just holding these ideas in your own head, you can spread them and proliferate them and find other jerk fans so much easier than you ever could before. And more than that, you can find the people behind the thing that you like, the people that you blame for ruining it. You can find them in a way that is way harder for them to ignore than ignoring a bunch of hate mail that comes in. So there's that, but there's another thing as well. For the rest of us, those who aren't doing that kind of thing, it makes avoiding it a lot harder because, well, it used to be that when you had a handful of dedicated forums and fan spaces for specific things, if somebody was real toxic, you banned them off that forum, you did not have to deal with them again. I mean, maybe they come back under an alt, but as soon as you realize it's the same person, you ban them again. There was that, but even before that, if you had a local fan club of something and somebody was a jackass, you stopped inviting that person to the meetings. It was a lot easier to avoid and get away from the people who made the fandom not fun. Now, that's not to say it was zero effort to get away from those people, but it was a heck of a lot more manageable. Good luck getting away from the toxic fans now. Now when it's so much easier for them to spread far and wide and so freaking loud. And a big part of this is the fundamental building block of social media. Engagement. Nothing engages like a fight. For all the stuff that people can and do put out into the world on social media. Jokes, warm thoughts, wholesomeness, professions of love, beautiful imagery, art, porn. For all of that, that will not engage the way that a fight will engage. Because when a fight happens, not only do you have the people fighting, but you have all the people talking about the people fighting. And then you have the people fighting about the people who are fighting. Because here's the fight, and then somebody makes an observation about the fight, then somebody starts fighting with the person who observed something about the fight, then you have another fight that you can also have engagement on, and that gets out of control real quick. There really is nothing that drives engagement. Engagement being comments, tweets, quote tweets, likes, dislikes, depending on the platform. That's all engagement. And nothing engages like an argument. Because there's the argument that's happening, then there's people start discoursing about the argument, then there'll be the backlash to the backlash over the argument, and it just perpetuates, and it's all engagement. And that is the fuel that social media runs on. Think of it this way. If you were in a physical space, say a convention of some kind, a Comic-Con, a specific fandom convention, whatever it might be. If a literal fist fight between a couple of fans broke out at one end of the convention hall, you might not want to be close enough to get pulled into it. You'd probably go and see what's going on, though. And even after the fight's over, and both people have either agreed to behave or one or both of them have been banned from the venue, that fight is going to drive a hell of a lot of the conversation. And thankfully, that does not happen in physical fan spaces very much. But it's because if you do that, you might be physically removed from the space. And you also might get punched in the face. Whereas on social media, depending on the platform, it might take a lot for you to actually run afoul of the rules and get banned and removed from the platform. But even if you do, you just come on right back under a different name. And also, no chance of getting punched in the face. And so while these toxic feelings have pretty much always existed in fandom, they are so much easier and so much safer to express in our current environment. So is it worse from the sense of the core feelings, the vitriol being spat by fans? Honestly, not really. What is worse is the proliferation and the way in which social media biases that toxicity and favors it. There's an aspect of the YouTube Studios app that I have on my phone that it's what I use to say, check comments and do some moderating while I'm away from my computer. There's an aspect there. It's currently called inspiration. It used to be called research. And one of the things on there is it shows you stuff that theoretically is similar to what you make, but it's like, here's some very good performing stuff that's kind of like yours. Maybe you should do something like this. You know what it suggests to me? Nonstop and unfailingly? Anti-woke stuff, top to bottom. I've never made content like that, but it's what the YouTube algorithm tells me I should be making. It's what I should be taking inspiration from, because that drives engagement. And I know that. I voluntarily have less growth and less engagement and make less money by the fact that I don't want to do that. If all I cared about was money, there's so much more money in that. Not necessarily because there's more angry fans out there, but because it drives engagement. A hate view is just as valuable as one from somebody who agrees and likes what you are saying. And if you can actually bake yourself into the discourse, yeah. Again, that's how social media is designed at this point. Because you'll have the argument, then you'll have the discourse about the argument over the discourse of the argument, new battle lines drawn, people getting mad at backlash, and then backlash against the backlash, and it's this whole spiraling thing. The toxicity doesn't organically drive the conversation, because in a system where social media either didn't exist or was built differently, the people who are shouting and just making everybody miserable, including themselves, so far as I can tell, they would be removed from the space. But that won't happen. It won't happen on YouTube. It won't happen on TikTok. It won't happen on Instagram. It won't happen on Twitter. And it won't happen because those people get mondo engagement, both direct and indirect. There's the direct engagement on their work. Then there's the engagement of all the people complaining about what they're saying and debunking them and replying to them and responding to them and making fun of them. And oh boy, look at all this juicy engagement. The fundamentals of how social media has been built means that the worst behavior, which again, I will argue has always been there, and has always been this bad or close to it, it gets pushed to the forefront, which is frustrating because it makes it appear more popular. It makes the rage seem far more widespread than I believe it actually is, because the rage drives the conversation by design. Social media is designed to push the rage. We are in an age of hate-bombed reviews and people showing up on videos that have nothing to do with something just to yell at me that The Acolyte sucks, which is a show I don't even like very much, but I did one short like a year ago where I pointed out the thing does exist and is in fact going to come out, but I had to turn off the comments because I was deleting about 100 transphobic comments a day, and so now they go to my other stuff to shout at me about The Acolyte, even if they check my actual opinion. I don't think the show's that good, at least not at time of recording. It's okay. But these are the people that are empowered by social media. Their rage gets fueled with more rage, and we get angry about them existing, and then they get angry at us for being angry at them, and it just keeps going. It's a perpetual rage machine. But that's not fandom. That's social media. Because that's as equally true of politics as it is of geekery. So, what do we do about it? I don't know. Roll back the clock like 20 years and completely redo how we approach social media from the ground up at the birth of the stuff? Short of that, I don't know. But I think it is healthy to remember that this behavior is not new. Its proliferation is aided by stuff outside of the fandom itself. But this behavior, it's not new. Fans aren't worse. I'm not even convinced that there are more toxic fans on a raw number or even percentage basis than there used to be. I'm not even convinced of that. It's just their voices are empowered. But I think it helps to have the perspective of remembering there wasn't some old golden age where everything was fine and everyone was respectful. That never existed. Hate to burst your bubble. But I just had to get those thoughts out of my head. It spiraled all from just that initial tweet. And some people, like I said, told me that me saying 60% was low, but I pointed out, I'm not counting the people who are angry at the people who are angry. I was only counting the initial people who will be angry about whatever the reveal of Mrs. Flood is. That, I think, it will be about 60%. But whatever your thoughts are on that or anything else I've said, drop something down in the comments and let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills, enables me to do this as my living. Also means you saw this video a week early. But even if you can't help me out that way, like, share, and subscribe. They all help me out. Don't worry too much about it, though. What I really want you to remember, that as long as you're not a jerk, and you know when you're being a jerk, just don't be a jerk. You know when you're doing it, and sometimes you'll say, it's okay because, just don't do it. And remember that you are beautiful. You are valid, and you are loved. You are the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. And now to thank my highest supporting patrons. Robin Moore, Zumula Fulla, Goddess Elida, Trista Ashley, Oliver B., Melissa Peterson, Tarak, The Thing That Goes Going to the Anime, Jean Foray, Movie Turtle, Ulrich Bogdan, Loki Eris, Linda Walters, Jen, Auntie Kate 808, Becky Sparks, Fernambulax the Poodle, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperol, Dave Hall, White Bearish, Rosalind Bennett, Pal Barabajoggle, Lucy Wood, Dorm Mayhew, and Mary G. Thank you for your support, and consider supporting me as well on Patreon.